Yeah. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining. So this session is UNHCR alongside our partners Madrasati, Can't Wait to Learn, and Centreity. We're going to be looking at designing EdTech with inclusion for refugees. Before I go on, I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Jackie Strecker to say a couple of words.
Great, perfect. So just to say a huge thank you to everyone who's joining, a lot of common allies who have supported, I think, a host of work when it comes to making sure that refugees are digitally included and able to benefit from education technology. I know several of you were on the previous call that we just had, looking also at the Universal Declaration around education connectivity. And so what we wanted to take some moments to present to you is a little bit of the experience that we've had to date, but also open up the discussion to hear more, as we know there's going to be greater investments in this space on how we can all benefit and leverage our collective learnings to make for truly inclusive design. So I'll hand it back over to Frankie, who has recently joined our team to lead on connected higher education, but is a guru when it comes to all connected education activities. And we'll walk through with our teams, but just a huge thank you for everyone joining us today. Thanks. Over to you, Frankie.
Cheers, Jackie. So just to say, in the title of this presentation, we've used EdTech, but generally UNHCR refers to connected education, and that's what I'll be using in this presentation. We prefer connected education because it focuses more on the linkages between students, teachers, and their communities, which may or may not be facilitated by technology, but technology is not a central focus. So today we've got a great cast of speakers. We've got Cindy, who's the CEO of Centreity, Judith, who's the program director of Can't Wait to Learn, Tala, who's the director of Madrasati, and myself, who was working for UNHCR. I'll allow them to introduce themselves in more detail when they speak. So even though online learning is, it has been viewed as one of the more effective modalities we've seen during COVID, we should note that refugees still face considerable challenges when it comes to accessing the internet. So we know, for example, that the share of students with no access to the internet at home varies from around 15% who have no access in Western Europe or North America, up to as high as 80% in sub-Saharan Africa. And then again, when you look at this statistic in terms of refugees, the UNHCR estimates that refugees are 50% less likely to have access to the internet than the host population. So at UNHCR as well, we've noticed there has been a rapid increase in mobilization around connected education. We've seen this during COVID, but also prior to COVID, there's been a rapid scale up of investments in connected education. This has been evident in GIGA, but also through with assignment of government budgets looking towards connectivity. And so what UNHCR is advocating for, and what we've observed, is many of these planned investments in connected education won't reach refugee populations. We've seen a lack of planning and investment for infrastructure and development to increase the provision of connected education in refugee hosting regions. And we're sure that this in itself has the potential to increase the much spoken about digital divide. And so we see there is a real need for action now around how to include refugees in connected education opportunities and make sure that investment is targeted in those areas. So today, how is this relevant to our talk? We're going to hear from three approaches that, to the use of connected education. All of these approaches, I should say, are quite focused on Jordan, but we think there are some lessons that can be drawn across contexts. And particularly the focus of what we're going to hear today is around working with governments at an early stage in connected education opportunities, or creating opportunities and investments. And this is building up to what Jackie is leading on, which is the Connected Education Challenge, which will be launched at Rewired in December. So the challenge is trying to secure concrete commitments for inclusion of refugees within broader connected education investments and announcements. And we are planning to create materials, guidebooks or checklists for governments, donors, program managers to support in ensuring that investments in connected education for refugees are going in the right direction. So what we're hoping through this session to do is to share some experience of creating connected education opportunities for refugees. But because we have an experienced audience of practitioners in this room, we're also hoping that we can get some feedback on you. We're going to have a short breakout discussion. We want to get your feedback and your thoughts on what are some of the key considerations for making connected education investments to ensure inclusion for refugees. So if you're able to, either copy the link to the Menti there, or go to menti.com and put in the code. I've set up that question in a Menti. So I'll repeat it again. So what are the key considerations for making connected education investments to ensure inclusion for refugees? If you could just go to the Menti page, and while you're listening to the speakers, but also during the breakout discussion, just see if you can drop one or two answers into that question in the Menti. Please ensure that you include your name and your organization. And this is, as we said, part of an ongoing discussion to try to build or to try to support the Refugee Education Challenge and the materials being developed around that. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Judith, who is going to talk about the experience of Can't Wait to Learn in Jordan. Judith, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us. It's a great honor to be here. I'm Judith Flick, and I'm the Program Director of Can't Wait to Learn, and I'm joined by Hussein Al-Amoudi from Jordan, our Program Manager of Can't Wait to Learn there. UNHCR has asked us to share our top-line thinking about designing for inclusion in digital learning by working very closely with the government from the very, very start. After a very short sort of top line across different continents and countries, I'll go into some examples of 3 of them where we work: Uganda, Lebanon, and Jordan, and we can work and discuss more details with you in the sessions thereafter. We can go to the next slide, please. So very brief introduction of Can't Wait to Learn. Can't Wait to Learn provides cost-effective solution to close the education gap for millions of children affected by conflict. It's a digital tablet-based innovation program, innovative program, providing children access to quality education in both formal and informal settings. And it covers grade 1 to 3 math and reading in Arabic, English, and French is coming up. It offers children an opportunity to continue learn to read, write, and count through a self-paced digital game, which is specifically created to reflect their world and context together with them. We work together with Ministries of Education to ensure that learning objectives are based on their national curricula. Children's progress is monitored and used for further improvements of the program. And currently we are working in Jordan, Lebanon, Sudan, Uganda, and Chad, and South Sudan we are starting very, very soon. So what is our learning across very different contexts? To no surprise, that co-design fosters trust, buy-in, and a platform for long-term collaboration and sustainable impact, because we work together side on side. Co-designing national curriculum, because that's what we do, provides a platform for integration of refugees in national school systems, because you complement what government's already doing, and also in return of that, they have a listening ear to what you have to say. Co-creation ensures intervention is responding to real needs of the ministry. It builds capacity of the Ministry of Education and system strengthening, therefore, and it's more sustainable. And cooperation ensures bigger and faster scale up. And Cant to Learn is at the moment with a big help also from UNHCR, HEA more specifically, on that road to scaling. So in very short, our recommendation is that response has to be fulfill real needs, high quality, aligned to the needs of the Ministry of Education and coordinated. Let's look at a few examples. So first, Jordan, we started in 2015 with a needs assessment. Already the needs assessment was done together with the ministry, and we have a very close collaboration there. In Jordan, we work at the request of the ministry in schools, where often we don't. You'll see the other examples in a minute. Thereafter, we co-designed the game and co-created it also with children. And the ministry had a very keen interest up to every single detail. You know, the detail involvement depends from each country. In 2008, we had proof of concept, and that further increased the trust of the government. And then COVID hit. The trust by then was built, and the government came to us to see if we could find a solution to the crisis at hand with a home-based version of Cant to Learn, and that's what we're building at the moment. And with that, also the scale up. So in short, ensure buy-in by cooperation, utilize existing experience of the ministry, because we worked side on side with them, offer something innovative, something they don't have, adapt your priorities. So our priorities weren't what we offered at the end. Listen and communicate and close gaps, so that it becomes a useful partnership. That all said, of course, there are also risks involved in such a close relationship. It's time consuming. We have to be flexible, to the planning of a ministry. Ministry also changes, its curriculum, so you have to change along. Efforts to manage expectations, also cost time. There are sometimes expectations of coming, with funds. And that was the case in Jordan for a long time. And we now see that the trust is such high that the ministry is also willing to invest financially in Cant to Learn. Sometimes there is also resistance to change. And, when circumstances change, you sometimes have to start again. I'm not sure how I'm doing time-wise, but cut me short, Frankie. Can I go to one more example? Yeah. Let's look at the next page then. So Lebanon, different context altogether. Our proposition there was that we were going to do Cant to Learn in formal schools, and we realized that there was a huge gap in non-formal education. So we offered Cant to Learn for non-formal education, math and reading. That really built a relationship of trust, so much so that the ministry asked us to lead sort of development of the full BLN curriculum. And that then provided sort of, an opportunity also to use Cant to Learn in not only in formal schools, but also, sorry, not only informal settings, but also formal schools for retention purposes. Then again, COVID hit, and we're looking together with the Ministry of Education into home-based care, not looking into, we did. And the ministry is now ready to digitize the BNN curriculum, and that's War Child is involved again. Lessons here are compensate the Ministry of Education's curriculum, be flexible and adjust to what they need, offer quality. So without quality education, none of this would have been possible. You build a trust not only by, responding to their needs, but actually coming with really good results and showing this through evaluations and rigorous research. The risks are lack of capacity to reciprocate, sometimes opportunism, if we have a very small organization, very dependent on funds from donors, they very often in our sector come, on a short-term basis. And if there are other parties coming with bigger funds, if there's no good coordination on the ground with the ministry, but also between parties, there's a danger of duplication, in this case, the BLN curriculum. Can we finish with Uganda? Uganda, very quickly, again, very different context. Need assessment there in 2017 together with the government. Government was a little bit, more removed. We had approval of the curriculum and roll out in 2018. 2019, we did an impact assessment that showed that our results were better than a comparative higher education. And when COVID hit, we did home-based schooling, both by giving the tablets to children and then bringing them back again, but also in other ways. The government, again, because we had built trust, came to us to ask if Cant Way to Learn could also be used for different students, and did a test at the end, and that demonstrated that it had better results, the home-based curriculum, than comparative one. And now we're looking into scaling this, and of course, including the refugee population in that. Lessons very similar to others, working with ministries and stakeholders at a community level, also very important, creates ownership. Quality means credibility. System strengthening means that you also have a platform for dialogue. And responding to real needs immediately is also very important for, of course, ministries to include refugee population and other needs. So the risks here were that there's a general lack of funds, as we all know, for education. So even though you're very successful, you've proven quality, if there's no funds available both from donors or governments, you can't proceed. And there's still, in some contexts, a negative perception of tablet technology, enhanced teaching and learning. And last, priorities of the ministry sometimes change as they do. And one needs to sort of change accordingly with them and adjust. I'll leave it at that, and really looking forward to discussions in the breakout rooms.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Judith. Just to say as well, I think there was an issue with the Menti, the code. So I think we've put the link in the chat, and that seems to be working. So please feed into the discussion on the link through the Menti. And remember, the question is around recommendations that you would have for designing with inclusion, for donors, for governments, for program designers. I'm going to hand over now to Cindy. Let me just see. Sorry, Cindy, I'm just... Okay.
Thanks, Frankie. Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Bonfini-Hotlosz, and I am the CEO of Centreity, but I'm here today on behalf of the Connected Learning and Crisis Consortium and the working group Instructional Design for e-learning. Next slide, please, Frankie. The working group Instructional Design for e-learning, or IDEL, consists of a team of connected learning specialists that really span the range of EdTech and instructional design and ministry. So you can see here we have representatives from multiple institutions. Any one of us could have content and do have content that we're using in the education and emergency space. However, collectively, we have a lot of experience that we brought together and tried to solve one of the biggest barriers that we have. Again, we work in tertiary education, and one of the barriers that we have is quality content and relevant instructional design methodologies for working with governments at this point. Right now, we know that we don't know all the context that the content we're building could go into. However, by working collaboratively with people on the ground, we can actually build something that's much more relevant and much more higher quality. And so together, we came up with a process and piloted it with the Ministry of Higher Education in Jordan. Next slide, please, Frankie. We had a relatively short timeline. Our planning phase was September of 2019 to launch December of 2019. Now, just to give you some context, at that time, Jordan did not have an active policy on connected education and was just dipping their toe and trying to figure out how they would consider connected education at the tertiary level. Next slide, Frankie. So we came together in a learning strategy meeting and started to plot out what were the needs, which the ministry actually had a very good handle on where they wanted to go with tertiary education and connected education. Also, we brought together representatives from the university at this meeting as well. So together we were able to come up with a plan, an outline of how we might be able to scale quality in higher education with connected learning. Next slide. One of the very interesting things that I think you need to think about, though, when you're attempting to do these kind of things, is that, of course, our focus has always been in education emergencies. The ministry's focus is also on what's happening within their countries themselves. So when you're thinking about working and co-creating with a Ministry of Higher Education, you really need to think of everyone's goals, not just those for the refugees, but ensure there's refugee inclusion in the bigger picture. Next slide. Our timeline was kind of interesting. So phase one began planning September 2019. We had a pre-workshop survey of all participants. At the planning session, we decided to invite key individuals at each of the public and private institutions to the meetings. There would be an instructional designer, there would be faculty that would be designing content. And so everyone received a pre-workshop survey that gave us an idea of what their experience was prior to the workshop. Then the workshop happened in December 2019. So you could imagine what happened. Again, this is an entire country that did not have a connected learning policy that favored connected learning at the tertiary level. And then there was a pandemic. What we saw happened was the leaders that emerged at the workshop became the leaders for each of the universities that they represented. And another thing that we saw is that now they also had a working plan. So it was almost godsend that the timing of the workshop in advance of the pandemic helped enable them the conversion to a connected learning platform for the universities in Jordan. We have a tentative phase 2 workshop planned, and then phase 3. Why 3 phases? The first phase, we're building this on a pedagogical approach called cognitive apprenticeship. So the first phase was really us working to be able to deliver the content in conjunction with the ministry. The next phase is the university leaders that we worked with in conjunction with IDEL will be delivering the training. And then the third phase is they'll be delivering the training on their own. So we basically shift from our lead to their lead within 3 phases. Next slide. So the workshop, again, we had a fantastic team to work with. We built a workbook that is available open source that we're more than welcome to share. And it's built on using the best practices that we have across the organizations. So feel free to, I'll later put the link in the chat where you can download the workbook if you'd like. It was conducted, we had 9 universities represented about 50 people in attendance, including ministry representatives. And we met for 1 week. So Frankie, next slide. As I said before, there were faculty in attendance. They were identified by a specific program that the university was interested in building in a connected learning way. Also, there was institutional support. Like Judith said, you can't really depend on a constant, right? There's always change. So different universities had different types of institutional support, whether they were private or public, whether they were a technical school or a full-scale university. It was a very different mix of what type of institutional support was available. Next slide. The university teams collaborated on one proof of concept module. So together they built one module of a high quality connected learning experience. This isn't computer-based training. We need to be very clear that connected learning really is a 3-dimensional experience for the student and the learner. So it was a very intense 1 week build of a proof of concept. Next slide. We had a lot of formal pictures taken of the group, but I chose this one for this presentation because it really shows sort of the camaraderie that was established during this week. It was fascinating how it evolved. At first, the workshop was very much us presenting, and that took about 1 hour. And then we had members of the group actually engage with us to be able to help contextualize even further what it was we were saying. For example, one word was strategy. Strategy was a very difficult word. We were talking about strategic knowledge, right? So in our methodology, there are 3 levels of knowledge that we present: domain level, procedural, and strategic knowledge. And what we know is domain level is very easy to convey with connected learning. It's facts-based. You go up a level to procedural, you can do the didactic part by connected, but the practical part, you have a little you need to really think about how that works within the context. But that strategic knowledge is one that is very culturally and contextually biased. And so trying to explain that, and of course I was on the stage at that particular moment trying to explain that. I had amazing help from the crowd, and it broke down like the barriers, I think, between us. And by the end of that first session, we were all laughing and enjoying each other, and that continued throughout the workshop. What's fascinating is I think we came together as a workshop, but we left as I think lifelong colleagues. These are great people to work with. As you know, COVID happened, and these people were called by their university to step up and help lead the conversion. We also were called to step up and lead the conversion. The same process that we taught in Jordan, we had in the United States. We had to build 335 courses within a 3-month period to be able to scale up for even in our context. So I love this picture because you could just see we're all talking, we're all collaborating, we're all trying to figure out what's the best way to take a picture in a wide format. And it was just a joy to be a part of this, and to get to know each other. And what they're doing is feeding back into the collective knowledge so that phase 2 becomes very rich and very vibrant. So what's next? Well, what's next is we have a whole nother generation of leaders in e-learning that can take and build their message within their country. And that's what's exciting for us. I think the collective learning that is involved between the people that are working in the field of education emergencies, as we build capacity, as we build one more faculty member who knows how to deliver quality higher education and can build content in the language that the students may be learning, the better off we are. So for us, seeing these next generations of leaders emerge in e-learning is really the end goal.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cindy. That was a great presentation. We're going to hand over next to Tala, and Tala doesn't have any slides. So Tala, are you ready to take the floor? And just a reminder to everyone that they'll be a bit briefer than anticipated, but we'll be in breakout rooms after Tala's spoken to discuss with Tala in one room, Cindy in another, and Judith in another, your ideas around recommendations in connected learning for refugees, how to promote inclusion, thinking about it from the angle of, government program designer or donor. So I'm going to hand over now to Tala.
Thank you, Frankie, and thank you, Judith and Cindy, for the very interesting presentations. My presentation, I think, is kind of aligned with the efforts that you are putting, but probably I will, more like Judith, I will talk more about the basic education. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the director of Madrasati. Madrasati means my school in Arabic. It is a Queen Rania Al Abdullah initiative that aims at improving the physical and educational environments of the most vulnerable public schools in Jordan. To date, we have served more than 840 public schools, which are identified as underperforming or they are in dire need of help. And we have worked and we have reached to more than 340,000 students. We have worked with 16,000 teachers and worked with more than 150 partners. So this is a brief about the initiative that I work at. So we all agree that education is a basic human right. It protects, it empowers, and it enlightens people. What's beautiful about education is that it does not have a nationality and it does not differentiate between any nationalities. So when we're talking about refugee education, it should not be considered as a peripheral issue. Refugees need to be accounted for and they need to be included in any official structures and in all national policies. Why I am saying this, I thought of sharing a bit of context for the audience about education in Jordan. So education is usually provided through formal, informal, and non-formal structures or schemes. However, we are all familiar with the formal education, but for the informal and non-formal education, I know in many countries, they are often used interchangeably. However, the context in Jordan is a bit different. So according to the Ministry of Education, the non-formal education, whether provided in the forms of remedial education or adult literacy programs or catch-up programs for school dropouts, usually is kind of acknowledged. So the student or the child who endures the educational process in the non-formal structures, towards the end of his or her journey, this child receives a certificate, receives an acknowledgement from the ministry that this person got educated. Unfortunately, with informal structures, this does not happen because in a way, the informal education in Jordan is kind of considered as unofficial. So even if the child receives probably the same kind of programs, but unfortunately towards the end of his or her journey, they do not receive any kind of official acknowledgement from the ministry stating that this child got educated. So this, unfortunately, for many of the programs that are provided for the refugees, unfortunately, they mostly fall under the informal scheme or informal structure. So this, in a way, makes kind of a discrimination against the refugees. And in a way, as if like the refugees receive some sort of a parallel system that is created for them. And you know, whenever there is a kind of distribution of resources or devices, in the case of COVID, unfortunately, they had the least priority in many cases. So why I'm saying this? Because this compelled us at Madrasati to tackle the programs, particularly the ones that are directly targeting the refugees, to address them in a different way. So rather than creating, parallel systems or creating special programs for them, what we did is basically we wanted to include them and work in a more inclusive approach. So, and that has been our experience in working with UNHCR with the Colibri platform. For those who do not know Colibri, Colibri is a connected learning platform that includes many resources and educational resources that are developed by different providers. And most of these resources, they are often spoken but with different dialects in Arabic. So it's not typically the standard Arabic. So what we did in working UNHCR on this program, we acted as the focal point with the Ministry of Education. So UNHCR, they implement Colibri in educational hubs that are outside schools, and they usually target the communities. But what we did with UNHCR is basically we worked closely with the Ministry of Education to align or to map this content that is available on Colibri with the national curricula. But not the national curricula that is based on the textbooks, but more on we identified the learning outcomes for the grades, and we did this exercise of mapping. So what we did is basically we formed a digital curriculum consulting committee that is comprised of the Ministry of Education subject matter experts from the curriculum department. This committee, we trained them to map the synergies between the Colibri digital content and the national, as I said, the national curriculum outcomes for math, science, English, the ICT for grades 7 to 11. And we try to focus on STEM concepts. So, and throughout that process, Madrasati supervised the mapping process and regularly reviewed the mapping documents to ensure the quality of that exercise. What we did afterwards, or actually parallel to that effort, is that we worked with the Queen Rania Center at the Ministry of Education. This center is responsible for the connection of the schools, the IT in general, related issues. So what we did with them is we created a channel for Colibri and designed the tree diagram so that, you know, it would be smooth for the teachers to use the aligned and mapped content relevant to the textbooks and the lessons of the subjects. So this partnership with the MOE guaranteed that the mapping efforts were directly associated with the MOE standards, and we ensured that there is a proper ownership of the process. So for example, the committee is totally aware of the content, that any content that may address religious or political issues should not be included or it's not acceptable. And what they did also is that they ensured that the used language and the terminologies, if in case they are not spoken in standard Arabic, you know, they would omit such resources to ensure that the students can relate. So there would be some sort of a relevance and usability of the content with the teachers and the students. They ensured that that the educational and the scientific terminologies that are used on the Colibri platform are updated and are aligned, as I said, with the national curriculum. So finally, after completing this exercise, what we did as Madrasati is we modeled and tested this approach with teachers by equipping certain rooms in some schools. And we did a lot of observation just to identify how this model works. And in case there is any opportunity to improve the delivery and help the teachers and train them so that they can better utilize that resource. So this experience was very successful so far. Like, unfortunately, with COVID, we had, like, most of these efforts were implemented during COVID time. But now that the schools are back, we are excited about running the program and ensuring that the teachers are using and following with the students to see the impact on their educational outcomes. So finally, I would like to conclude by saying that this exercise taught us that refugees refugee education should no longer be a reactive solution. People should be proactive in planning for their education. They should not always remain as in a second priority. They should be part of the main priority in planning, policy formulation, in executing programs. And because, as I said at the beginning, education is a human right, they have to be accounted for during the planning and the budgeting for the program. So rather than investing a lot in creating parallel systems, We need to build programs by complementing national efforts and investing in existing structures that they may become more inclusive and more responsive to needs. Hence, the foundation will be there that will ensure that there is ownership, there is a possibility for scaling, and that we are ultimately reaching the vulnerable children despite their language, despite their nationalities, despite their gender, despite their status, and thus we reach that stage where education is inclusive for all. Thank you, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of the questions that the audience might have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tala. I think, as often happens, we've had fascinating presentations and we've got a bit over time. So our time in the breakout rooms is going to be a bit reduced. So the time with me now is Central European time 5:21. I think we'll have around 6 or 7 minutes in the breakout room. So we'll come back at 5:28 and do a quick wrap up and look what's been put on the Menti board. Please do keep adding to the Menti board. Add your comments in there and your suggestions. Remember, around the question which I've put into the chat around considerations for making investments in connected education. But now we'll go to the breakout rooms for a chance for any follow-up questions with the three presenters, but also to get your thoughts on what are those considerations.